Hi, I'm Sam. Welcome to our webinar on the dangers of silica. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the dangers of silica, and we've got a special guest, Ian Greaves, who's going to be answering some of our questions about silica as well. But before that, we're just going to do an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation, whose land we are presenting from today, and pay respects to their elders, both past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm Sam. I work in the OHS team here at Trades Hall. So part of my role is helping to put together these webinars and getting people to watch them, which is what we're doing right now, hopefully. So we are trying a bit of a new format with these webinars. In the past, we've kind of dished them out via email, which has come with a link that you can click to watch the webinars, but we're hoping to eliminate some of those barriers and get a few more people watching by broadcasting them on Facebook Live, which we hope works really well and is more convenient for people to tune into. And then also we'll have a bank of webinars in a few months' time that people can just watch from, that'll just be stored on our Facebook page. So we're mixing up the format a little bit, which should go quite well. If people want to get involved or have questions, especially for our guest who's going to be coming on a bit later, just pop them in the comments. Luke, who is also in the team, is just off camera. He's going to be monitoring he says, hey, he's going to be monitoring the chat and the comments. So if people type comments, he'll be able to forward them on to me and we'll be able to answer them on the webinar, which should be pretty cool. So let me just get a hold of this technology. Here we go. Boom, the dangers of silica. This is what we're going to be talking about. Here we go, beautiful. That's the slide one. Also a quick shout out to Slater and Gordon, who supported us to run webinars like this one. We really do appreciate what they do by allowing us to get important information out there to as many people as possible. So shout out to those mates, appreciate it. So let me get myself out of this. Great. So silica, what is silica? So crystalline silica is one of the most abundant materials on the earth and is a major constituent of construction materials such as bricks, tiles and concrete. Silica dust is so fine it can enter the deepest part of the lungs, and the dust can build up in your lungs and scar them, which leads to a number of diseases, which we will talk about a bit later on with our expert. So a bit more of an introduction to silica and what it is. It's one of the most common substances on Earth, which I super briefly mentioned before. It is super commonly found in sand, rock, concrete, and brick. And silica dust is created when concrete or brick or other substances are cut into or grinded, and that's when the silica dust is formed. And silica is not dangerous on its own unless it's in that dust form, when it's able to be breathed in. So silica is everywhere in the world around us, and it does serve a purpose, but when we crush it or grind it or cut it and we make that dust, that's when it becomes particularly dangerous. So here are a few examples of what it can kind of look like on a construction site. So there are a few activities which can kind of create silica dust. Brick cutting and chasing, angle grinding on concrete and masonry work, concrete cutting, jackhammering, scabbling, chiseling of concrete, and also the cleaning up of dust and debris caused by those activities. So once that silica dust has settled on the ground, it can be stirred up again and become dangerous again at a later point, or even, I believe, attached to people's clothes, which can be shaken off later. So there's many ways that the dust can kind of get around and be dangerous. And also cutting and working with manufactured stone, so Caesar stone, which is pretty common in bench tops. So if people are getting their kitchens renovated and they want a nice Caesar stone counter cut to size, that can be a common place where silica dust is created. Which puts a whole bunch of different workers at risk. I'm just going to pop myself back in here as well. Hi. Which puts a whole bunch of different kinds of workers at risk. So we've got workers obviously in building and construction and demolition work, which is kind of pictured in these slides here, as well as preparing kitchen and laundry bench tops for that stone I was talking about, cutting that stone. excavation work, abrasive blasting, mining, quarrying, brick making, road building, stonework, casting work, foundry work, explosives work, and also in like jewelry workers in developing nations. Like there's a massive list of kind of occupations in which you could be exposed to silica by your work, to silica dust. Cool. So that's kind of what silica is and how it's created. So we have Ian Greaves with us today as well, who is... Hey Ian. Hey. Just off camera. Hey, he's coming to Trades Hall to say hi and to have a chat with us. He's an expert in the field. I've got a bit of a intro to you, which might be a bit weird that I'm reading it sitting right next to you, but hopefully not too weird. So Ian's been retired for a couple of years, but remains a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. His expertise has been in pulmonary medicine, occupational medicine, exposure assessment, epidemiology, and workplace standards. There's a big list, mate. Mm-hmm. He has been a member of the Threshold Limit Value Committee since 1997, during which time he served on the Dust and Inorganic Subcommittee and chaired that subcommittee from 2008 to 2017. During this time on that committee, the subject of exposure limits for silica has come up several times. Correct. You're an expert in the creation of silica and what it can do to a person's health as well.
Yep.
So we're hoping we could just chat a little bit about some of that now. So I guess, in your words, what happens when a person is exposed to silica? How is the damage formed?
Yeah, a couple of words about exposure first. When we talk about exposure, we're talking about how much of silica is in the air, the concentration in the air. We're talking about how long a person is being exposed and how long it is since they were first exposed. So all of those factors are important in determining the total amount of exposure that a person has experienced to silica. And the greater the total amount of exposure to silica, the more likely there are to be changes in the lungs. And the earliest changes in the lungs are where silica deposits in small clumps in the lung. And around those clumps of silica particles, there develops inflammation and then fibrosis, scarring of the lung. And it forms a little round structure which we call a silicotic nodule. And those silicotic nodules start out as really tiny, but with more and more silica exposure, they can get bigger. And as they get bigger, over a period of time, they can sometimes run together. And when they start running together, that's called conglomerate silicosis or progressive massive fibrosis. And in terms of this inflammatory fibrotic response, that's the point at which someone might well start to feel a little bit breathless. And there's quite a lot of destruction of lung tissue, and the scarring causes distortion. As the scars contract, it causes distortion of the lungs, and eventually a person can end up in respiratory failure over a period of years. And at that point, their life expectancy is severely shortened.
Right.
So that's the pattern of silicosis. The progression to that very severe end stage is fortunately uncommon today. It used to be a lot more common, and we still see it in some developing countries where exposures are very high and for a long time. But for the most part, we don't see that very much today. Of some concern, though, are complications of silica. And two big complications occur. One of those is an increased risk of tuberculosis. Unfortunately, tuberculosis is not common in our country today, but it is in the developing world. And 50 years ago, tuberculosis complicating silica exposures was quite common. More importantly, and as a result of recent knowledge, we know that the more silica people are exposed to, the greater the likelihood of lung cancer. And this is like any other lung cancer that occurs. The risk is made worse if you smoke, but the cancers occur in people who don't smoke as well. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, has determined that silica is indeed a human carcinogen.
Okay.
And has recommended that exposures to silica be kept as low as possible as a result of that. Which kind of plays into some of our discussions that we'll come to in a little while about what's a safe level of exposure.
Yeah. So I guess, it sounds like there's a pretty dramatic scale of how silica can affect a person, or kind of what that timeline looks like. Are there any kind of earlier warning signs that, like, someone's exposure to silica might be a little too high before it leads to that kind of cancerous stage, or lung cancer, or stage where someone could be commonly short of breath or something like that?
Right. The most common symptom for people exposed to silica dust is cough.
Yeah.
And it's not accompanied by any change in lung function early on. They don't have any great difficulty in breathing, but this cough, a persistent cough, is often the first sign that there's silica being deposited in the lungs, and an early warning that perhaps exposures are too high, or the person has accumulated too much silica. After that, there will be changes, mild at first, but then becoming noticeable to the person in their lung function, and they will have what we call obstruction to their breathing. And so the breathing becomes a little bit more difficult. They notice that they get short of breath when they exert themselves, such as hurrying up a hill or something like that, or working a little bit harder. And it just seems like life is getting more difficult from a breathing point of view.
So from like a reduced lung capacity, or reduced lung function can be earlier warning signs.
It can be.
And could that... Is it possible for someone to be experiencing that reduced lung capacity and be noticing it, but not have worked on a work site, or feel like they could have had exposure to silica for several years or months, but not notice that, like, that damage that's been caused? And like, how far is that time period? I guess.
Right.
Sorry, I think it's.
Someone's
having a celebration next door. I don't know what that is, but it sounds like they're having a great time.
They're just happy we're here.
Yeah, they're happy about where people are learning about silica, I think.
Yeah.
They're cheering for us. That's all right.
So as far as this progression to respiratory impairment, that really occurs in people who have had pretty high levels of exposure, and they would know about it in their workplace. People who have worked in construction or mining or sandblasting and have had a lot of exposure to silica, they're the ones who go on to get that. On the other hand, people who have been exposed a little bit less and maybe just have some mild scarring in their lungs that they don't really think anything of. I mean, it's not apparent. Those people are still at risk of lung cancer. And so not always will people have any warning that they're at risk of a complication of silica until they come down with that lung cancer.
Hey, Luke, my friend. Do you reckon you'd be able... Can you hear the clapping on the stream, my friend?
I can hear them through the headphones.
Could you pop your head in there and...
I'm not going out.
All right, well then we'll just...
interrupt whatever that's...
All right, well we'll just deal with it.
Okay.
So I guess this is what happens. We're doing it live. It's not fake, I guess you can tell.
I guess so.
So I also wanted to ask about if there is a cure for these kind of ailments. If someone's lungs are damaged because they've had exposure to silica dust and they are experiencing that shortness of breath and that trouble breathing, are there remedies for that exist?
Short answer, not really.
Okay.
Silica tends to hang around in the lungs for a long time. Some of it is cleared by coughing it back up.
Okay.
Some of it gets cleared by cell mechanisms in the lung that ingest the little particles and take them out of the lung to the lymph nodes. But most of the silica ends up staying in the lungs where it's deposited. And it's a sad thing, but even if someone stops being exposed to silica, the reaction to the silica can still proceed in the lungs
Okay.
from the silica that remains there.
That's what I was reading as well when I was doing a bit of research, is that the damage itself in the lungs, even if you're not exposed to more silica, that damage can grow, and that area that's been exposed to silica dust and is damaged can just expand over time without more exposure, which is a scary thing.
And it may also be relevant that the risk of lung cancer also increases even after you've stopped being exposed.
Okay.
So that's not a happy situation for people who may have had past silica exposures of a significant amount.
Yeah. I guess just before we move on to some of the things people can do to reduce their exposure to silica, is there anything else that you think is worth mentioning about the repercussions on a person of how silica can affect someone's health?
Yeah, I mean, silicosis is easy to diagnose. And so if somebody wants to know whether their lungs are experiencing reaction to silica, they can get a chest x-ray, a simple old-fashioned chest x-ray, and those little nodules will show up as dots in their lungs.
Yep.
And they'll know, a person with some experience can tell them how severe those changes are.
Yeah.
And there are standard ways to read those x-rays that give some idea as to what the severity of the reaction is. And in some ways that might help to give them some reassurance that the changes are mild and they may not go on to anything. On the other hand, if they've got very severe changes that might suggest they're going to go on to get respiratory failure, then there are some things that might be recommended, such as stopping smoking.
Okay.
Working on an exercise program that would help improve their overall physical state. That certainly helps in people who have chronic respiratory disease, and also the prompt treatment of any respiratory infections.
Okay. So I guess, like many things, it's more action can be taken when it's spotted early. So I guess if you are, watching this and considering that you may have been affected by silica dust, then why not go get it checked out? It sounds like it is reasonably easy to spot, and yeah.
And also, silicosis is a compensable disease, and in terms of workers' compensation, it's important to register the fact that you have this condition.
Yeah.
Even if you're not disabled at the time.
Yeah, okay.
Because in some parts of the world, there are statutes of limitations that imposed on people who become aware that they have a condition, even though it's not bothering them, and they don't do anything about it for another 10 years, and then, whoops, the statute of limitations has expired. So if you do think that you have silicosis or silica problems, then at the time you're told that there is a problem, it's important to check out what your legal situation is with respect to compensation.
Cool. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Cool, thanks. Luke, are there any extra questions coming in from the stream?
Not at the moment.
That's all right. Hey, no drama at all. But the stream's still working, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, then we might just move along. But if you do have questions, about if you think you've been exposed to silica dust, or you have any questions for our expert while he's in house, just pop them in the comments.
Actually, sorry, there is a question.
Oh,
here.
there is a question.
Oh,
Hold on.
so-
Hold your horses, everyone.
Yeah, sorry. So Des, our mate Des,
Yep.
has asked. So in his workplace, sand gets crushed to help with the breaking of trams, and his work is designated work group. They breathe the crushed sand in, and you can see it in the air. He basically can see it there.
So
I guess he just wants he says, is there any advice, I guess, in terms of either identifying, how hazardous that is, and then what they could do.
Okay, and what was sorry, we've just had a question come in from Des. You all can see it, but I don't have the stream up in front of me. So the question was, let's repeat it so everyone can hear it, was about sand crushing, Luke? Yep, sand crushing to the point where it's visible in the air, and how much of a risk that would be. So sand obviously is one of the materials that has, a silica makeup. We were talking about this before we started streaming, but about the size of the particles of the silica particles affecting how dangerous they are as well. I guess what's your take on the question?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In general, when rocks or sand are crushed, it does produce pretty small particles, and those can get into the air and they can be breathed in. If those particles are small enough and the size is about a couple of millionths of the thickness of the hair, if they get that small, they will end up all the way down in the far reaches of the lung where this scarring is occurring. And those very fine particles can certainly cause problems. And this is a work environment that really cries out for measurement of silica exposure levels. And if that gentleman's work environment has not conducted those measurements, I would suggest that he or someone in that environment recommend that there be some exposure estimates made, some actual measurements, because that will tell you what the risk is and whether the work environment is in compliance with the regulatory standards.
Awesome. Well, I hope that answers your question. Anything else, Luke? Luke, my friend? Any other questions come through?
No, that's it.
Okay, no other questions at the moment. That's fine. If anything else comes through, just chuck it in Slack and I'll be able to read it on camera, which will be helpful. Awesome. So, in that case, we can move on to talking about some preventative stuff. So we will switch this over here. Protective gear. Sorry, this is just me. It's going to crop you out of the camera, but Ian's still here. Everyone is just off camera. There you go. So protective gear. So as with all health and safety issues, the most effective control is to eliminate the risk entirely. If you don't need to partake in any activity that creates silica dust or exposes you to silica dust, don't do it. That's, the easiest way around it. However, of course, circumstances will come up in many lines of work where it's unavoidable. The creation of that dust is unavoidable. So in these cases, there are two main varieties of protective gear to protect you from silica. The first one is this on-tool extraction. So this local exhaust ventilation, which we have a picture of here, which is kind of a tool that fits directly around like parts of tools that drill or cut, and they're just vacuums that suck up the dust as it's created. I was reading online that this is one of the most effective ways to control the dust. Does that sound right to you, Ian?
Yes, it can be quite effective.
Cool. Let me just check something over here. This is muted. Great. Can be quite effective.
Yes.
Sorry team. Get my notes up. So, yeah, I think next we have a short video of that as well, which we can play and skip through, just make sure there's no sound coming through that. So this is just, this is from a Milwaukee ad, which kind of highlights some of those tools. Obviously, it's an ad, so it's cut together in a pretty flashy way, but you can see the tools with those dust extracting solutions like placed on them. So yeah, in a situation like that, you can see that the dust is just, it's not being created. It's being sucked away as soon as it's been created. So pretty effective measure of control there. Secondly is water suppression, which is an interesting one as well. I'd seen this taking place on construction sites. I thought it was more for some reason like overheating machinery or something, like overheating blades or like protection coats for the blades, which is not the case. After doing a bit of reading, it's a water suppression, which can be used through non-electric tools to wet dust down at the point of where the dust is generated. So water is provided to the blade when using saws and just like wetting the materials and wetting the area to ensure the equipment and work areas are cleaned with this water as well. And it kind of, my understanding is this kind of product will wet the air around the dust, and therefore the dust will fall to the ground and become like a sludge rather than like propagate in the air.
Right. The principle behind wet processes are if you put water vapor in the air or water, it will indeed trap those particles.
Yep.
And it'll rain them out on the ground. The problem with using wet processes is eventually what's wet dries out.
Yep.
And then it is at risk of becoming a dust again. And so unless these wet sludges are removed, once they dry out and people start walking on them, the dust gets thrown up into the air and people can breathe it in again. So they're very good at keeping the dust levels down during the operations, but you need good housekeeping afterwards in order to stop the dust from being regenerated.
Cool. So there is a risk of, if this measure, this precautionary measure is taken, but then a few hours pass and in the sun and the dust dries out again, a big gust of wind blows and it's trouble again.
Yeah. Or people walk over it or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And we also have, we have a video about these as well where you can just see them in action. This is an ad as well, but you can see the tools pretty effectively being used. Just give it a minute. Yeah. So you can see once again, there's kind of no dust escaping while that saw is doing its thing, is drilling. Beautiful. So those are kind of two kinds of, I guess, specialty pieces of equipment that have been created just for the prevention of this kind of dust, right? And lastly, we also have protective respiratory equipment, like personal protective equipment, which can prevent silica dust from being breathed in, but should be used in combination with some of these other controls, is what I've been reading. So it can't protect you, if it doesn't fit you properly. So if you have a big bushy beard, like Ian or I do sometimes. Employees should have workers fit tested and trained to use these, as well as taught how to, maintain them properly. This is even more important if you have facial hair, as we just mentioned. It is important to choose the right kind of protective equipment for the job. So masks and things can be helpful as well, but used in combination with something else, it seems like most effective.
Right. In general, this kind of personal protective gear should be the last thing we look to. The first thing should be removing the hazard from the workplace or using control technologies that greatly diminish the amount of the silica in the air. And then if that doesn't work, and it needs to be tried before going to the personal protective equipment. The personal protective equipment is not the first resort we go to. Because eventually it will fail, and it always does. No matter how well it's fitted, no matter how well it's maintained, no matter how well the workers are trained, there will be times when these respirators fail. And so they're not foolproof. They do back up other systems, and they have a place. But people shouldn't be expected to wear them all day. They're uncomfortable, they're hot, you can't talk. They are just not a very satisfactory solution overall.
Okay. Fair comments. Yeah, sorry about the chanting that's going on in the background. Nothing we can do about that. But that is okay. So, we also want to take this opportunity to talk about... I'll just check to make sure there's no other questions that come in. Looks like there's none. That's okay. Yeah, so we also want to take this opportunity to talk about the state of silica in Australia and the state of silica exposure in Australia. So at the moment... Sorry, I'll crop me out of this one too so you can see this properly. Boom. So at the moment, Australia and America have different measures of exposure to silica. Whereas in the States, it's 0.025 milligrams per meter cubed. So I'll just cut back to me for a sec. So in the States, if you've got a meter of space by a meter of space, a cube of it, it should have no more than 0.025 milligrams of silica in that space, occupying that air. But in Australia, as you can see, we will kind of tolerate up to 4 times that exposure, is the current exposure standard. The thing is, this rule, and you were telling me off camera before, hasn't changed since 1969.
Correct.
So it's old as heck, It is not up to date with the state of knowledge, is the phrase that's used. So America has updated their exposure standard to keep in line with the times. We have not. We've fallen behind the times. And as far as we're concerned, there's no reason why we should be behind the US in this. And there's no reason why we should have a level of exposure tolerance that is 40 years old as well.
Right.
So we're kind of looking to get that changed to match America's standard. So this is the Trades Hall standard. This is what we're going to be backing, 0.025 milligrams per meter cubed, a quarter of what it is now, which will keep us up to date with the state of knowledge and keep us up to date with what best practice is at the moment, I guess, Ian.
Right. And even this value of 0.025 milligrams per cubic meter is not a magically effective level.
Yep.
It's a level that is largely determined by the quality of the science at the present time. And as IARC has said, we need to reduce exposures to as low as we possibly can to avoid lung cancer.
Yep.
And 0.025 may not even be as low as we need to go.
It's a step towards where we need to go, is how I see it. But in another few years, the state of knowledge might change again, and we might say that's too high. This is still higher than it should be. Let's look at halving that again, or something like that.
0.01 or something like that.
0.01.
Yeah. I think this is going to be an incremental process as industries come along and get on board with the fact that silica is a lot more dangerous than we thought it used to be.
Good to know. We'll jump back into the slides here as well. So on the back of this and on the back of our campaign to kind of, make an announcement that Australia should update its standard to be in line with America's, we're having an event at the CFMEU offices on the 31st of August, which everyone is more than welcome to come to. Luke, can you pop the link to the event? We have a Facebook event set up. You can pop that in the comments. So you'll be able to find that easily. So this is basically going to be our event where we talk about silica exposure standards and why we're not happy with the state of things as they are now, where we think they should get to, and how we think we're going to get there. We've got a lot of mates coming out from the CFMEU who are going to join us there, which is going to be awesome. It should be a really insightful time. So we'll post a link down to the event in the comments. So that should be really easy to access, and that has all the details about the time and date and stuff like that as well. So if you're going to take one thing away from this webinar, I would say it should be something along these lines. I don't know if you agree, Ian, but there's no safe level of exposure to silica dust, but it is the employer's responsibility to ensure that they limit risk to employees.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So always be careful around silica dust and don't do anything you feel puts your safety at risk. I guess it's a case of trusting yourself as well. Why would you do something that you don't feel safe doing? Don't do it. if you're at risk, if there's any doubt, don't do it. So that's everything that we've got at the moment on silica. I'll just pop myself down the corner again. So we're going to have a few resources in the comments that you can download as well. We're going to have a poster and a certificate that'll be available for you to download. The poster has some information that we've talked about today, some information on the exposure standards, and some questions around if your workplace is safe from silica exposure, or if it's something that you should be thinking about. And also a certificate that you can kind of pop under your boss's desk that kind of highlights the need for this kind of update in the standard as well, if you think that's going to be useful, which is cool. As we mentioned at the start, this is kind of a new format of how we're going to do these webinars. We're planning on doing it like this for at least the next little while. So if you have
we've already got some suggestions on the next topic that we can do.
Oh, so Luke's just let me know that we've got some suggestions on the next topic. What have we got, Luke?
Diesel fumes.
Diesel fumes, awesome.
Might be an interesting thing to cover.
Yeah, so I think actually for next month, we're looking at, a topic of the HSR's choice. So we might be running a poll later in the month to see what people are interested in learning about and seeing, we can get some more experts in to get some good information out there and keep people safe at work. That's why we do what we do. If you have any feedback on the format as well, and if this was easy for you to access and easy for you to, find and keep up to date with, that'll be awesome. If you learned something useful, let us know that as well. Also, things that you didn't like about the format of the webinar, if it's not super conducive to your lifestyle, if it's on at the wrong time, if the content's not right for you, just pop down that in the comments as well, and we'll take that into consideration next time we...
Jade is a fan of the format.
Jade's a fan of the format. Thank you, Jade. We're a fan of you. Appreciate that. But yeah, if there are things you didn't like as well, that's just as important, that kind of feedback. That's really awesome. So yeah, just as a reminder, we do have that Silica standard launch event. Luke's going to pop the poster in the comments. The link to the event in the comments as well, so people can really easily jump on board with that stuff. If you have any follow-up questions around Silica, Ian's given us the okay for us to forward a few emails onto him if questions are kind of beyond our comprehension on it. But do feel free to get in touch at ohsinfo@vthc.org.au. That's ohsinfo@vthc.org.au. If you've got questions around Silica and Silica exposure, we'll answer them if we can. If they're too hard, we'll forward them on to Ian because he knows more about them than us. And lastly, just another thanks to Slater and Gordon, another shout out like we did at the start. You guys do make this kind of thing possible and make sure we have the resources to help get this kind of information out. But that's everything that we had planned for today. Thank you so much for joining us. The next webinar should be in around a month's time if all goes according to plan. Ian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sam. My pleasure.
And we will... here's Luke. Here's real. We didn't make him up. And we'll let you all get back to your evenings. You've only missed 7 minutes of The Bachelor. So thanks, mate. All right. Have a good night, everyone.